Number 7 on the list, we have the Danish gambit, one of the more common openings that you'll see. Pawn e4, pawn e5, and white just starts giving up material as fast as possible, starting with pawn to d4. After it takes the pawn, just going to come up here to c3, allowing his opponent to continue to take that material. His opponent doesn't have to, but the intent would be for this opponent to take. Bishop here to c4, not even worrying if black takes more material. If black does continue to take, bishop here to b2. All of a sudden, white is down 2 pawns in material. But as you can see, he has a very aggressive setup. Both of his bishops are eyeing down this kingside. Black has none of his pieces involved in the game. White has a fairly open lane for his queen to get involved on both sides of the board. In the middle, very easily can get his knights involved. Castle queenside or kingside depending on if he needs some safety or if he wants to be very aggressive. So, Danish gambit, definitely one of the openings that you'll get a lot of opportunities to play, so it definitely makes my list of the best chess aggressive openings. Number 6 on our list is the Cochran gambit, definitely one of my favorites. After pawn to e4, pawn e5, knight here to f3, pretty common moves from both sides. If black tries the Petrov defense, which is not the most common, but you do see it every now and then, white's usually going to respond with knight to e5. Followed by pawn to d6, kicking this knight back. The knight usually comes back here to f3, and then we see the knight take here on e4 and things continue. But this is kind of boring, and I like aggressive openings. So, instead of white moving his knight back, in the Cochran gambit, he's actually going to play knight to f7. Now, he's going to be giving up his knight early on. Black pretty much needs to take this material or he's going to lose his queen or his rook, which seems extremely bad. So he needs to take this. But this is going to be completely fine. This is what white wants in this position. He's given up a knight in material, and in exchange, he has 2 pawns. And his opponent's king is wide open. White can pretty much attack for the rest of the game, but definitely a fun aggressive opening. Number 5 on the list of aggressive opening traps to make our list is the Scotch gambit. It starts out with pawn to e4, pawn e5, I love pawn e4 openings. Knight to f3, knight c6, and then pawn to d4. This is the Scotch game. The Scotch game is typically pretty slow, pretty boring, and so someone came up with the Scotch gambit, which makes it all the more interesting. So, after the pawn takes here on d4, white's going to forego taking this material here on d4. You know, you could see an exchange of the knight and the knights here, but instead, white's going to play bishop here to c4, and he's going to have a very strong attack that he's going to start. So again, the Scotch gambit. Number 4 on the list of aggressive opening traps to make our list is the King's Gambit, my favorite personal opening to play. Pawn to e4, pawn e5, and then pawn to f4. Giving up material. If you haven't played this before, it's definitely great for not only beginners but also for those people who have been playing for a long time. After the pawn takes here on f4, usually knight to f3, this is kind of the way I play. You can play bishop here to c4 if you want to, but there are so many fantastic lines. I actually want to go over one of my favorites because it's also extremely aggressive, so I'll keep it with the King's Gambit, and that is the Muzio Gambit. Your opponent won't always play into this, but if they play pawn to g5, the typical way for King's Gambit would be to play pawn to h4, and then when they push down, you play your knight to g5 and then look to get your bishop involved. But this pawn right here is kind of allowing for an outpost on g5. The Muzio Gambit just doesn't really care about all that. It's always trying to get more pieces involved in the action, so it plays bishop here to c4. The pawn is going to push forward, attacking this knight. White doesn't care. White's just going to castle on the kingside and pretty much give up that material. So, after the pawn takes, the queen takes right here, and all of a sudden, if you look at the setup, the kingside's kind of weakened for black. He has no pieces really involved in the action except this lowly pawn here on f4. All of a sudden, from white's perspective, he's castled, he's got his queen involved, he's got his bishop involved. Things are going to be very difficult for black to hold on to all the aggression that white has. So, not only is the King's Gambit pretty fun and aggressive, but the Muzio Gambit takes it to a whole other level. Number 3 on the list of aggressive opening traps we're going to be looking at is the Halloween Gambit. It is extremely risky, but it is so much fun to play. It starts out with pawn to e4. If people are curious why e4 is a pretty common occurrence, it's because this opens up the door for the light square bishop to get the queen involved in the game. Usually, e4 is a much more aggressive opening, so that's why a lot of the openings have e4 in them. But pawn to e5, and then we have the 4 knights game. So, knight to c3, and after knight to c6, we have knight to f3. The Halloween gambit is knight taking here on e5, which seems a little crazy, and it is, which is why it makes the video. Knight takes here on e5. The pawn is going to push forward to d4. If the knight comes back here to c6, we kind of just push forward again, and we can kind of force it to come back here. So, very aggressive, just continuously pushing, forcing black to really just move his knights across the board. He could try another knight move, but all in all, white is going to be pushing forward with his pawns, trying to control the center, get his bishop involved, and his queen has some support right here. Definitely a fun opening, and although white's down in material, many times, if black doesn't play perfectly, white can get that back. So, definitely a fun opening, but very risky as well. Number 2 on the list of aggressive openings we're going to be looking at is our only opening from black's perspective, and it is the Latvian gambit. I've been playing it more and more just because it's so much fun to see your opponent's face when you play it. They really think you have no clue what you're doing. And it's really fun to play. So, pawn to e4, pawn e5, pretty common. Knight to f3, which you're going to see all the time, so you're going to have many opportunities to actually play the Latvian gambit. Then you're going to play pawn to f5, a pretty crazy opening. There are a lot of different ways that white can respond to this. Especially if they've never seen it. They may try something super crazy, aggressive, opening up the kingside over here. There are a lot of different ways to bring the bishop here to c5 and actually give up material, even the rook or the queen if you want to, and just go ahead and attack this square here on f2. So, a lot of different ways you can do this. Number 1 on the list of best aggressive openings is the fried liver attack. It's just so much fun I had to include it on the list. Pawn to e4, pawn to e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop here to c4, you've got to love the light square bishop in an aggressive opening. Knight to f6, all very common moves. White has many different ways he could play. He could play pretty passively with castling on the kingside, he could play pawn pushing forward. Knight to c3, these are all fine, but these are all boring. And that's why we play the fried liver attack, and that's with knight here to g5, getting ready to play knight taking here on f7. You could also, if you really wanted to, play bishop here on f7, but all in all, white's looking to exchange material off the board, get that king here to f7. Go ahead and get that queen involved in the game, attacking if he needs to, and just chase this king all over the board. If you haven't played it, I definitely recommend it. If you haven't watched the video, I also recommend watching that. There's a lot more to this, so many different lines that both sides can go to, but all in all, it is a fantastic opening and definitely makes the top of the best chess aggressive lines. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed this video. I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching. And subscribes the channel. If you like the video then like it, and share it with your friends to give them a chance to watch it too. Best of luck.